Magna Carta, the Charter of Liberties. When tyrannical English King John's barons, tired of their conflict with him, demanded in 1215 that he confirm a long list of rights and royal obligations under the trees of Runnymede, the ruler reluctantly agreed. The compromise, known as the Magna Carta, limited the power of the king, granted rights to freemen, and became the inspiration of many democracies today. Due to this document, people are free. They're living their life, and they're happy. Let's go back to the medieval ages, where England was a much different country than it is today. Many people believe that the ruler during 1215, known as King John, was one of the worst kings in history. John was born at Beaumont Palace, Oxford, England, on December 24, 1166. Being King Henry II's favorite son, John was appointed the Lord of Ireland in 1177 and was given lands in England and on the continent. When Henry II married Eleanor of Aquitaine, his empire grew, as well as his family. They had 8 children, 5 of which were boys. As the youngest son, it was unlikely that John would ever be king. When Henry II died, Richard became the King of England. Richard spent barely any time in England. He was off fighting the Crusades or battling rebels in France. In 1199, while trying to take a castle in Salou, Richard was wounded and died. So, despite the odds, John was crowned King of England. Once he was king, many conflicts arose. Many times King John went to battle, and he lost more castles than he gained. When his noblemen fell into his debt, he took their sons hostage. One of the nobles, de Braose, escaped and fled the country, only to die in exile. This so infuriated John that he cast de Braose's innocent wife and children into prison, where they slowly starved to death. John was even more unpopular among the barons, the lowest class of English nobility, whom he taxed heavily in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars. Others were brutally murdered, punished, or had their property seized. King John abused people, and it is said that he had one of his clerks crushed to death on suspicion of disloyalty. He used comparatively new and very efficient methods of taxation, which, unlike most royal taxes at that time, lay heavily on the rich as well as on the poor. John was treacherous, unstable, and greedy. No man, rich or poor, was safe. In 1214, King John launched an unsuccessful invasion of France and taxed the English nobility again to pay for his war. In an attempt to recover his lost possessions, King John summoned all the nobles of England to report with their paid fees, and he raised the taxes in the country. This sparked a revolt of the barons in 1215. They wanted freedom, and they acted up by drawing up a document that outlined basic political rights. The barons demanded that King John obey the law, but he obviously refused. In May of 1215, barons rebelling against the king's tyrannical rule captured the capital of London. That spring, he agreed to meet with them to negotiate a peace. They met at Runnymede, a meadow by the green banks of River Thames. The barons presented the king with a number of demands, the Articles of the Barons, also known as the Charter of Liberties. In fear that the rebellion would escalate to full-scale civil war and endanger his throne, King John affixed his beeswax seal on the document written by his scribes in iron gall ink at Runnymede on June 15, 1215, making it Europe's first written constitution. After the Magna Carta was sealed, the king got the Pope to declare that it was invalid because he had been forced to sign it. It was legally valid for a little more than 2 months, whereupon it was declared shameful and demeaning, illegal and unjust by the Pope. This caused an immediate effect of a full-blown civil war, known as the First Barons' War. The royal troops and rebels fought many battles until King John fell ill and died of dysentery on October 19, 1216. John's son, Henry III, came into power when he was 9 years old, and soon afterwards there was peace. William Marshall, Henry's regent and advisor, reissued the Charter of Liberties as a royal charter in 1216. In 1217, William Marshall reissued it again for Henry as a part of the peace treaty to end the Civil War. When it was reissued, it had a second section, known as the Charter of the Forest, which gave free men access to the country's forest. Because the Charter of Liberties was on a bigger piece of parchment, it became known as a Great Charter. In Latin, that is Magna Carta, what it is known as today. In 1225, the Magna Carta was reissued by Henry III. In 1297, Henry's son, Edward I, reissued the charter as well. This Magna Carta was finally made part of English law. The charter established the principle that the king was subject to and not above the law. English kings since John's time have occasionally broken the terms of the Great Charter, but never recklessly. The king's power of arbitrary distraint was abolished. For example, in the future the king could imprison nobody without a judgment according to the law of the land in a case decided by the defendant's social equals. The Magna Carta has inspired people across the centuries, from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi. As Article 29 included, no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed, or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any way, nor will we proceed with force, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. The whole Magna Carta consists of 63 different clauses. Most of them have very little to do with us today. This clause, however, is a compromise, as well as a foundation of liberty of every free citizen, which we all value. As Benjamin Franklin stated, on the 15th of this month, anno 1215, was Magna Carta signed by King John, for declaring and establishing English liberty. Benjamin Franklin wrote this to urge his readers to remember the significant event and mark the day. This was an opening of freedom for many people, and it was to be remembered. Historical figures all over the world believe that this charter was the physical and metaphorical starting point for the history of American freedom, and today, people still revere the birth of the Magna Carta. This is an interview of June Osborne, British Anglican bishop, explaining the significance of the Magna Carta and the 4 copies that live today.
They will be very aware that actually there is no value that is more important to us than freedom and the protection of justice. And so what this represents is not just a piece of narrative history, it's actually about our identity, about who we are. And I suspect, therefore, that everybody who sees the documents together will be inspired by the experience.
This charter had altered forever the balance of power between the governed and the government. Without this document, we might have been in a position that England was in 750 years ago. Its influence can be seen in other documents across the world, including the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. The Magna Carta also played an important role in the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution of 1688. The Magna Carta inspired American colonists a few hundred years later to declare independence from the British themselves. This shows that the Magna Carta's most important legacy is that everyone, including our leaders, must obey the law. Granted by the King of England to a group of rebellious barons and signed on the plain at Runnymede on June 15, 1215, this great charter is widely viewed as one of the most important legal documents in history, enshrining the concepts of government accountability and protection of individual rights. What started out as a document of specific complaints from a group of barons has turned into an international symbol of liberty. And without this, we might not have the rights we value so much today. This is a timeline showing the birth of King John, the evolution of the Magna Carta, and how 800 years later it is still revered.